Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining Coffee with Colleen this morning. We're really pleased to have the North Olympic Legislative Alliance lobbyist with us today. That's our county's and Jefferson County's lobbyist, Josh Weiss. Join us. I don't know if it's really from Olympia or if his home is just right nearby. But we also have the Ports lobbyist as well, Bruce Beckett, with us. And so we're nearing the end of legislative session. So thank you so much for Josh for joining us today. And I hope he's got a few things to share initially, and then towards the end, we'll open it up for questions. He also represents a lot of different large counties, such as Snohomish and I think Clark County as well. And so, which means he has a broad array of issues that he tracks for different counties. So it might be that he or potentially Bruce could answer your questions about what's happening in Olympia. So I'll let Josh go ahead and take it. And then if you have any questions, just put your name in the chat or raise your hand, whichever you'd like, and I'll go ahead and call on you. So good morning, Josh, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Colleen and everybody. It's nice to see you and nice to be here. And I'm really pleased as well that Bruce is here. And I'll share this a fair amount with Bruce. We've been doing a lot of work together for a couple decades now, actually, but this session in particular. And I really enjoy working with Bruce and happy to share the stage with him. So I represent NOLA, as Colleen mentioned, and we have 3 legislative priorities on behalf of the North Olympic Legislative Alliance. I'll talk about those in detail, but just a little bit of context. So we have 11 days left in legislative session. Sine die is on the 25th of April, which is Sunday. All the indications are, at least from what I'm hearing, that I think they'll get done on time. The budget negotiations have been underway since late last week, maybe about this time last week. We're hearing that they're going okay. The rumor I heard, again, curious if Bruce has heard something different, is that they will finish up sort of those budget negotiations over the weekend, get the details to staff early in the week, and then have the documents ready for public consumption sort of middle of next week, and then passage the last 3-4 days of session. There are some items, a number of items that are still in play. Last Sunday was the cutoff to get bills out of the opposite chamber. So House bills out of the Senate, Senate bills out of the House that are non-budget bills. Some of those are in controversy. They've been amended by the opposite chamber in a way that the originating chamber doesn't like, so they have those differences to work out. But Colleen, you asked the question a little bit before about the overall number of bills and just generally how much work there is compared to a regular session. I think right now we are definitely seeing less bills in this system. There was a big demand from legislative leadership at the beginning of session for them not to introduce as many bills. The House specifically said that they were not allowed to introduce companion bills. So it's not unusual at all for a champion, for an advocacy group to introduce a bill in the House and in the Senate, basically with the idea that you're going to educate both policy committees or fiscal committees on the issue at the same time, so that when they switch, you don't have to start from fresh with that other committee. That hasn't been happening as much this year. And actually, one is a little bit of a side note, but one of the key areas that is having an impact right now is on carbon pricing, where you saw the Senate moving forward with a really pretty substantial cap and trade proposal that has just come across from the Senate. The House is hearing it in their policy committee for the first time right now. And I've heard more than one member say that they are really struggling right now because they didn't have a companion bill, and it's such a complex policy area that they haven't worked on before, even just the idea of getting their arms around what does the bill do is a challenge for them. So you are seeing some slowing down in those types of areas, but otherwise the number of bills that they have to conference on is not really that large right now. The biggest controversy that is hanging over everything, usually it's the budget this time of year. This year it's on a transportation revenue package. They did both adopt current law budgets, so basically budgets that are in the transportation realm, assuming there's no new revenue source. Transportation revenues are really significantly down because of the COVID pandemic. While the operating budget is looking in really good shape, revenues have been really strong. Federal dollars have been, just as you know, a glut of federal dollars have come into the state for spending. There are not problems in the operating budget. Transportation budget is looking terrible. So without a revenue package, a lot of new projects that were scheduled to get done in the Connecting Washington package are getting pushed out, delayed. So there really is a lot of effort to try and get a new revenue package, but it is tied intricately with carbon pricing. There's been an ongoing years-long debate about whether that should be a cap and trade system or a just straight carbon tax. In addition, the House has always really felt like it was important to have a low carbon fuel standard bill, which is not a revenue bill, but is basically just sets standards on how much the overall carbon content that transportation fuels can have. That passed the House, it's over in the Senate, it's being considered, and it's sort of part of the overall package. You've had both the House and the Senate have put out detailed revenue and expenditure plans on the transportation side, but the House and Senate are not close in their thinking. And the transportation chairs, because of the virtual format, have not had time to actually sit in a room and really start to hash these issues out. So I think even though the Senate later this morning is going to be moving out of committee a new version of their revenue package, I think most of us are feeling like there is not going to be time in 11 days to sort of finish the overall transportation revenue package. And, that's a pretty significant, if they don't get it done this year, next year will be a short session. It will be right before an election. I think there's going to be a lot of hesitation about passing something that significant before an election year. So we might be a few years out before we see new transportation investments.
Real quick, Josh, if I may.
Yeah.
So are you saying you don't think cap and trade or LCFS would pass this year, or because that would be part of the transportation package, or do you think that'll pass, but then how the spending and any other elements of a gas tax or something, what's your crystal ball tell you?
So this is just my crystal ball. I actually really would like Bruce's opinion on this too, because we all pick up different pieces of information, particularly in this virtual format. So the cap and trade bill that came across from the Senate includes a provision in it that says it only goes into effect if it's accompanied by a transportation revenue package that produces at least $500 million per year, I believe it is. It might be per biennium. I'm not sure if Bruce, you know that. So they are tied right now. I think politically they're tied. And my guess right now is that I don't know if carbon cap and trade is going to pass. Low carbon fuel standard, I think, is in the same. I think it's less complicated, but it is clearly tied to the transportation package, and I'm not sure if it passes without it. Bruce, is that your sense too?
Yeah. The low carbon fuel standard is the one that has the poison pill, I call it.
Oh, okay.
The $500 million, condition before it goes into effect. But the cap and trade program would provide up to $700 million per biennium, beginning in a couple years, for the forward Washington, the Senate's transportation plan, up to $5.2 billion over 16 years, something like that. So Josh is absolutely right. This is all turned into a Gordian knot. I don't know what Josh thinks. I keep wondering whether this is all going to set up for a special session in the fall on transportation. If they pass one or both of these carbon packages, then they're going to probably want to try to get a transpo package before the 60-day session next year. And that could lead to a special session. I guess one observation I'll make is transportation packages have been bipartisan over the last couple of decades. I mean, a transportation project is not a Republican or a Democratic, bridge or road or whatever. And right now, I don't know what your perspective is, Josh, but it seems like the Republicans have not had the chance to really work this revenue package in the way that you would normally see.
I think that's really true. In the Senate, Senator Hobbs has been much more explicit about working with his counterpart, Senator King. They get along really well. And I know that that Senator Hobbs has tried to work with Senator King. I don't know that Senator King has agreed to the package or his caucus. There's this whole carbon pricing thing, I think, is really difficult for the Republicans generally to get behind. And it is the House Democrats, Representative Fye went out this last summer and did, I think the final number was over 100 different stakeholder meetings, did a ton of outreach across the state, but not a lot of work in the same way that Senator Hobbs did with his Republican counterparts. So the House Republicans are not in the conversation as much as the Senate Republicans. So I think Bruce is absolutely right. And I will say, to Bruce's point about a special session, I'm not really hearing legislators talk about that, but I think it makes absolute sense. I think that is a very likely scenario just from, I think that could actually work. And just, sorry, one more thing about that. If the pandemic, calms down a little bit with vaccines getting out there, there is actually the opportunity this summer for Senator Hobbs and Representative Fye and the minority party to actually sit down in a room and hash some of these things out in a way they haven't been able to do before. So I think that's really possible.
So at a high level, and how these bills would affect the people on the call or the citizens of Clallam County, it's basically a cap and trade. So I'm going to dumb it down as I see it, is every year big emitters, which Department of Ecology across the state identifies, can't release more than X amount of carbon emissions or any type of emissions. And then every year they lower it. And so the business has the opportunity and choice to determine how will they cut their emissions, and is it that they actually cut them, or will they put money towards a renewable energy or something like that. But that overall increases the cost of the products that those emitters produce. And then the low carbon fuel standard is for fuels. There's a requirement that I believe increases over time to add things like biofuel to their mixtures, so that, and does that truly reduce emissions, or is it just, a different, we're pulling ourselves away from fossil fuels and going towards biofuels, but then what are the emissions equivalent there? And so that too, though, will increase the cost of gasoline at the pump, and that goes up over time because the percentage amount of biofuels that are in the products we buy has to increase. And then my husband, I know, complains all the time that these new kind of fuels ruin the different motors that he runs on his weed whacker and whatever. But so can you share what the pros and cons are in those spaces, particularly with low carbon fuel standard?
Yeah, sure, a little bit. I mean, you described it really well, Colleen. So the low carbon fuel standard, the pro, I think, about it is that it does in fact reduce carbon emissions in the transportation sector. And transportation in Washington is our #1 source of carbon. So it really, I think from the advocate's perspective, it really kind of gets at one of the central components that you have in Washington about carbon pollution. There's a number of downsides about it, but one of the downsides about, and I'm sure there's more positives as well, but one of the downsides about it is it doesn't actually raise any revenue for the state. It raises the cost of fuel because now you do have to, in gas, you have to include a higher ethanol component, and in diesel, you have to include a higher biodiesel component. But you don't see any positive benefit for a transportation investment, or even projects that will have a positive impact for climate change perspective, such as building additional, light rail or multimodal transportation networks that don't rely on cars as much. Cap and trade, you described it perfectly. It has a positive, it does not have as much of a climate change benefit because emitters can go and buy credits rather than actually reducing the amount that they emit, but it does generate revenue for the state. And it is in fact a revenue positive. You can actually go and build some projects based on that revenue. Though there is
and how much of the revenue that it'll generate will go to transportation, or does that just go to the general fund?
No, it goes to, well, a little bit of both. And Bruce, I don't remember the numbers. I'm not sure if you do. And it's been a little bit of a moving target. It's been a point of negotiation about how much they put into the transportation budget. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. There is a significant debate going on inside the Democratic caucus, both in the House and the Senate, about cap and trade in particular. There's an alternative proposal out there, which is called Washington Strong, and it has been endorsed by the, what's the right way to say it, more progressive wing of the Democratic caucuses. It is a carbon tax. So it just taxes your emission on emission for greenhouse gases. It takes that revenue, it bonds it. It assumes that revenue source declines over time because eventually people figure out how to cut their emissions. But for the initial investment, you get a whole bunch of money out of bonds. It takes those dollars and invests it not only in the transportation revenue package, but also in infrastructure projects that are intended to, in long-term, reduce carbon emissions, including like sequestration projects and some, pro-environment types of projects. I think it really remains to be seen whether or not there are the votes inside the Democratic caucus for either of these proposals. They are very split right now. And I know that I'm going to stop here. I want to see if Bruce has any comments, but I also know that one of our colleagues, Mara Macholsky, is one of our lobbyist colleagues that represents tribes and others. She's on the line as well, and don't know if she has thoughts. Bruce, did I miss anything there?
No, I don't really know the deep, dark details of the cap and trade bill. It's only 80 pages long or something like that. But it does have a provision in it that I believe it's $700 million per biennium goes to transportation, up to a cap of 5.2 billion over 16 years. So it has a direct nexus with transportation from the revenues generated from it. And Josh is right about the split in the majority party. There is the no votes in the Senate on cap and trade came from Senator Lovelet from the north of you, and I'm blanking on the other one, but it's the arm that's really worried about differential impacts on certain demographics or communities, the environmental justice, if you will, that the bill would just simply allow quote unquote big polluters to continue polluting in areas that have been disproportionately impacted. So that's kind of the friction that's going on that issue. And I don't see if Maureen's on.
Mara? Yeah, Mara's out, but she might not be. Mara represents the Public Works Board too. I left that out.
And I think I recall the Ho tribe from
Okay.
Jefferson County, as I recall. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the big question that's up in the air. And so I've read different things about the estimates of cap and trade and how much that will impact gas prices, and then how much low carbon fuel standards would impact gas prices. Is there any consensus there, or a roundabout figure initially of what it would be and what it would go to?
There's not that I'm aware of. And it may be out there and I'm just not tracking that level of detail. Yeah.
Okay.
You do see different estimates.
Okay.
I will note that the low carbon fuel standard contains an exemption for equipment that is used in timber and logging.
Huh.
They have, and cap and trade also includes exemptions for certain level of exemption for timber type companies, though I know there's major concern around the pulp and paper. And Bruce knows more about that than me, but there is an attempt, at least anyway, to recognize the importance of timber to the economy. There's something else on the low carbon fuel standard I was going to add, but I lost it. Maybe I'll think about it later.
How does it affect boats, shipping, maritime, etc.?
Bruce, I don't know the answer to that. Do you?
I think Colleen, the fuels used for ships and aviation fuels and all those are exempted from it.
Huh. Because they have their own laws that they have to address?
No, I think it's literally safety and engine performance issues.
Okay. Well, I totally get that for aviation. Yeah. Okay. That's always been something, though, that frustrated me when I worked in this space years ago and trying to advocate for cleaner fuels, was that it seemed to me that the little guy was the one that was always targeted, and the bigger companies that had the lobbyists there at the table always got exempted. And so it was, you and me driving around in especially what I would talk about is we've got to make sure that the poorer people in rural communities, as Senator Hargrove used to say, that drive twice as far, make half as much money, and have a 1988 pickup truck making not that much compared to people that have the option to get on mass transit to get back and forth from work. They don't have those options, and so they are hit a lot harder typically with the one size fits all policy around fuels. So I know that it's taken a long time to pass any kind of policy in this space, but I also think it's probably going to be a much more complex, but probably a much better bill for the different realms of our society across the state that are in different types of circumstances. Is that fair or no?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think that's part of the policy dynamic that's going on, which really, for the Democrats, what you hear sort of circles back to their other really big priority this session, which is, overall tax equity. Mm-hmm. And, I think you probably have all heard that a capital gains tax has passed the Senate and is now in the House. It is in the House Finance Committee. I think we expect it to get exec out of finance sometime this week. Hasn't been scheduled yet, but it is assumed in both operating budgets. And, the thing about capital gains is not so much that the state needs in fact, it's not at all that the state needs the revenue right now. It is that the overall goal for that caucus is to try and have reform our state tax system so that it has less of an impact on people in the lower income brackets. Sales tax has a particularly heavy impact on people in lower income brackets. B&O tax is, I think as everybody knows, is pretty wildly impactful on our businesses. So how do you reshape our tax system so that that isn't the case? And they see capital gains as a way to do that. The problem with capital gains is that it's been struck down by the court or by the voters multiple times in the state. So the strategy here is to pass it by the legislature with ample time to get a Supreme Court ruling on whether or not it's legal or not. And so that in a year or two, when it's part of this larger tax reform package, they know whether or not they can rely on it or not. So I do expect capital gains to pass this year. I also think one of the key amendments placed on it in the Senate when it passed, because they needed some, Senate is pretty close actually between Republicans and Democrats. It only passed with one vote. And in order to get that one extra vote, they put a provision in there that stripped the emergency clause, which allows it to go to a vote of the people, a referendum gathering or signature gathering process this summer. So it will be challenged, I'm pretty sure, at the ballot as well as in the court. But I think that will pass this session as well.
Yeah, okay. And our state does have the most regressive tax structure. I think that's widely accepted, right? People don't argue that point relative to other states.
People do quibble with it. I think it's also, the counter argument, I guess you would say, from the business angle that you hear is we are also extremely competitive compared to other states because we don't have an income tax. But I think the regressivity for the most part is accepted. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Lena has a question here. Lena, do you want to ask it?
Sure. I'm just trying to know, what are you seeing currently for the capital gains tax? The last information I found was a 7.5% tax on any capital gains over 250,000. And it was, it seemed to be going back and forth whether or not real estate was included in that.
Yeah, so the intent, you're right, it's 7.5% on any capital gain over 250,000. And that is based upon filings with the federal IRS. The intent coming out of the Senate was to exempt real estate, but it was done, the striking amendment that they adopted was done fairly quickly. And so I believe, my understanding is that it was a mistake that they didn't get the language right. I know that there has been significant work done over the last several weeks with the realtors to amend the real estate language. And my understanding is that that's sort of been accepted and will be amended to make it clear that real estate is in fact exempted. And yes, Colleen, that's right, 500,000 for married couple.
Thank you.
And do you have any gauge on whether business property would be exempted as well? Or so for example, if I had rental properties and I was selling a rental property, that's technically a business property. So is that included in that exemption or not?
I think it is included. Bruce or anybody else, feel free to correct me if that's wrong, but I think that would be included in the exemption. It's real estate. The one exception that I am aware of, exception to the exemption, is, and this goes for timber and timber companies as well, which are exempted now. If you are selling a business, the value of that business is not exempted. And it's unclear to me. I don't think that includes the value of the real estate. I think the value of the real estate is exempted, but your overall business value is going to be taxed as a capital gain if you sell it.
That's going to continue the exodus of companies from this state. And people are just going to close their businesses down. They're not going to want to sell it because they're going to have to pay that high tax. They're just going to walk away from it, which hurts our next generation because we need these businesses to train someone to take over their business so that the business continues. This is just ludicrous, the way they're destroying small business.
Yeah. I should have also said, and I don't have all the details, I'm sorry, there is an exemption from the business sale provisions for smaller businesses. And I think I believe it was $10 million a year in revenue, but please don't quote me on that. And if somebody does know the detail, let me know.
Josh,
Yeah,
I agree. I think the last time I looked at it, which was a little while back, it was 10 million. So it really only the smallest of businesses does it really exempt.
Well, if 10 million of revenue is your annual revenue, that, you know, I mean, that's not certainly not your mom and pop retail store.
No,
And I don't know of a restaurant. Michael McQuay's on, and he's got the largest restaurant in the county. I think maybe Applebee's or something has more employees, but certainly that's locally owned and operated. And I don't know if we have any restaurants that have over 10 million in revenues annually in the county.
The challenging
I wish I did.
Well,
the challenging piece is hard to tell until everything is fully executed. And then the other thing I found about that regulation or that new tax is they're intending for that to start next year. So it's a good tax planning strategy for anybody that has assets that they want to try to sell off.
Yeah, the other thing I will say, please, if you are potentially impacted by this, please hire somebody to look at this in detail, because the exemption section is really complicated and I am not a tax attorney. So you need to get good advice on that, but that's kind of the parameters that we're aware of.
He is an attorney though.
But a lobbyist attorney, that doesn't really count. Would it be okay if I talk about the 3 NOLA priorities?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, we have 20 minutes left. So the 3 NOLA priorities were expanding broadband, providing financial relief for businesses impacted by COVID, and the marine tourism bill. And I'm going to start with broadband. And this is an area where Mara, if you're listening, please feel free and correct me if I stray here, because this is something I'm following, but not in a detailed way, like I'm sure the Public Works Board is following it. So the bottom line is the legislature is making significant investments in broadband this session. In the two budget proposals, the House provided $155 million total. The Senate provided $625 million for different broadband programs, but that includes over $400 million in federal one-time spending from the American Recovery Act. So some of the investments, they're both making investments of over $30 million in the CURB broadband program, which, as you know, is grants and loans for rural underserved areas. In the Public Works Board, there was a discrepancy. The House is funded it at $75 million for grants and loans to unserved areas. The Senate was at $150 million, so twice as much there. And then in the state broadband office, the House spent $50 million to implement, oddly enough, a Senate bill that talked about investments in rural areas for broadband. And then the Senate put, like I said, over $400 million of federal money through the state broadband office. So from a budget perspective, there's a lot of lining up that they need to do there. I don't know how those conversations are going sufficiently to tell you sort of where this is likely to land. But I think the bottom line is you can count on a pretty significant investment from the state in these grant and loan programs. The other component that I know that we've been weighing in for NOLA and tracking are the 2 bills that would allow for public retail service. And this has just been quite something to watch. You have a Senate, House and Senate competing proposals. They both moved out of the opposite chambers this last Sunday. They both continue to amend the same statute and contradict each other. The Senate bill now provides retail authority to PUDs and ports in unserved areas. And both of the bills have slightly different provisions for how the public entity needs to give notice and work with existing telecommunication providers before they can move into an area. The House bill does retain authority for cities, towns. So first-class cities already have authority, organic authority to provide broadband service, but this gives it for smaller cities and towns, counties, ports, and PUDs. Again, slightly different way for notice and working with the private existing retailers before they can go into the area. Both of them are focused on unserved areas, so you really don't see authority to go into underserved areas. I think it's, I guess I said this already, I don't really know how they're going to resolve the difference, but they're going to have to resolve the difference between the two bills before they pass them both. So that's where we are on broadband. Bruce, I don't know if you know anything else, or Mara, I see you're unmuted. Feel free and chime in if you have some more to add.
Not too much more. You covered it very extensively. Thanks. Definitely the two budgets are furthest apart that I've dealt with and any of my other clients on the broadband specific allocations to public works. Like you said, in the House, it's completely funded with federal funds. And as far as our account goes, and in the Senate, it's a sweep from the traditional account, which, is a priority for us to keep those revolving loan accounts revolvable. Now, when the federal funds are coming down, we're not actually sure if any of those can be revolved out as loans. So we're still waiting to understand if it's going to be just a pure grant exercise, which we've heard would be, maybe better for broadband infrastructure at least. But one thing we do know is that all three programs, CURB, Public Works, and now the State Broadband Office will likely be doing loan and grant cycles, this upcoming summer. So everybody who has a broadband project, whether it's ready for construction or even just in the feasibility stage, contact the programs and or your legislators and just get it on their radar. Because I think there'll be a big call for projects this summer. And then as far as, the rest of the budget goes, reconciling, the differences in the Senate budget is really around the federal funds and all of that going to the State Broadband Office, and then what the use for that will be. And then, the House spent that differently. And the board isn't tracking really the retail authority bills because, they're agnostic as to that. They're just a funding entity. But, Josh is right. They are pretty far apart still, and they're moving at the same pace, which is interesting. And, each of them are still amending each other's bills. So in the last 11 days, I guess some big questions still are the role for the statewide broadband office. And the role for that office is being, changed in multiple legislative vehicles. So it's going to be interesting how that comes out in the end. So watching closely and just definitely preparing for funding cycles.
Thanks, Mara. Really glad you're here. This was fortuitous. Just for the sake of time, I'm just going to keep rolling here. I'm going to talk about marine tourism first, sort of sandwich it between so marine tourism, we've been supporting House Bill 1107. This is the bill that allows larger vessels to receive the state permit to operate in Washington waters as a charter with a skipper. And so, great news here just yesterday. It passed the Senate on Sunday, or was it Saturday? Saturday or Sunday. And yesterday, the House concurred with the amendments that were made in the Senate. So this bill is on to the governor's desk. Bruce And Peter Schrappen from Marine Trade Association really deserve the credit on this. They've been spearheading this. There have been so many bends along the trail in this, including Department of Revenue coming in at the last minute with a bunch of concerns that we had to get resolved. Just a huge victory. I know that Bruce and I have chuckled along the way because we thought this bill could take a couple of years to get through, and getting it through this year is really, really wonderful. So I don't know, I covered that in kind of not much detail. Bruce, if you want to add anything, or Colleen, I know you've been tracking it closely too. Yeah.
Well, I would say that if you've gone into Port Angeles over the last year or so and saw the larger yachts in the Port Angeles harbor, the Olonian and the Hodor are examples. They have crews and they've come into the harbor and they have work done on them. And so as I understood it, if the yacht is larger than 164 feet, then currently under the current law, they're not allowed to come into Washington waters to have repairs done or to even, stay longer than a certain length. And so we were missing out on tourism, whether it be just for trips or actual, work being done on the yacht. And typically a yacht owner spends 10% of the value of the yacht annually on maintenance and the crew and keeping it going. And so some of these yachts are, $50 million. And so it'd be great to have them looking at our community as a location for repair work. And, they resupply and they fuel. And so our tax structure code has been limiting Washington State from getting any of this business. And these yachts would come into the Puget Sound and just head to Canada or Alaska and skip our area to spend money. So that's basically what this bill was about. And I think it really helped that Representative Chapman only had, for a long time, only one bill that he was sponsoring, and this was it. So he said, this is what's important to my community and me, and this is what I'm putting my political capital into. And so I think that had a bit of influence on moving it forward.
Yeah, I think that's right. Thank you, Colleen. You testified at least twice, maybe 4 times. Thank you for doing that. It was a great team effort.
Complicated bill, so I hope I didn't. But it's great that it's for the governor to sign. And are the expectations that he will sign it?
Yeah, Bruce and Peter met yesterday with the governor's staff. If you want, go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic. We are asking for letters of support, so Josh will be working with you, Colleen, for one from NOLA. But we did meet with the governor's office yesterday, and they were very complimentary of getting everything solved with the Department of Revenue on. And I think that probably tips it in our scale.
Great.
And they also thought it would be what we call a 5-day bill, Josh, which given the passage yesterday, it may go down there for signature, very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's great. This is one I'm sorry that we're not going to be able to all crowd into a photo with the governor and see the sign. Yeah. That would have been cool. Yeah. There's a couple of other bills that I want to bring up that we've been tracking and weighing in on for NOLA. So House Bill 1333 is the bill that Representative Theringer put forward and would have extended the 0.09 economic development program and was amended to include all the counties that currently offer it in the state. I was surprised it got out of Senate Ways and Means Committee because the chair, Senator Rolfes, doesn't usually like credits against the state sales tax. It died on the floor on Sunday. There was a significant effort to try and get it run and just couldn't get it run, including Representative Theringer. There is an effort still going on to try and get it run. It was mentioned in the Senate budget and try and get it run as an as necessary to implement the budget, but I think this bill is on life support, which is really too bad. I know a couple of cities in NOLA are really excited about authorizing tax increment financing in the state. That bill is still alive and looks like it's going to make it through. This is a big deal in the state. Has never had tax increment financing. So this will, for infrastructure for your local governments, this will be a great tool for them to have.
So real quick on that, I would love for you to touch on unemployment insurance. With TIF, though, I know it's a project basically for cities or ports, but it's the junior taxing districts so again, trying to explain it in real layman's terms, it's if you have a new project, the tax revenues that would create compared to the existing level of tax revenues, that then could be bonded. The future tax revenues can be bonded to pay for the infrastructure needed for that new development. But those new tax revenues that are generated will not, so it takes away from junior taxing districts. So like if they had a tax bill and ports and libraries and hospital districts and fire districts would get a piece of that new tax revenue, that is removed, and for how long? So, and does that include school districts as well?
Yeah, it includes all districts. What they miss out on is the increase in revenue that they would see from the infrastructure that goes in. So they're not losing anything from their existing revenue. They're not getting the revenue from the new infrastructure, but they wouldn't be getting the new revenue from the new infrastructure without TIF because you're using that revenue to pay for the infrastructure itself. So you're losing out on zero, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then they would get the revenue after the bond has been paid for. And how long can the bond be? Is it a 20-year, 30-year, 50-year? How long is the bond that typically?
It doesn't, typically it's, 25 to 30 years. It doesn't prescribe it in the bill, but yeah, once the bond is paid for, once the infrastructure is paid for, then the increment goes away and the junior tax, all the taxing districts then receive whatever the increased value is in their property taxes.
I see. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
One of the other bills that we've been tracking is House Bill 1332, which is a property tax deferral bill for businesses that have been impacted by COVID. So if your business has lost at least 25% of your revenue for 2020 compared to 2019, then you can defer your property taxes due in 2021 for a period of time as long as you have a payment plan. So basically it's giving you some one-time flexibility for property taxes that were due in 2021 because of COVID impacts. So, there's a little bit of a help there for businesses. Financial relief, is on our agenda. There are a whole bunch of provisions here that we don't really have much time to go into. The House already passed House Bill 1368, which was providing $250 million through federal funds for the Working Washington Grant Program. Both of the budget proposals made really significant investments in business relief. Obviously, we don't know how they're going to get reconciled necessarily, but grants and business reliefs is going to be in the budget. Let's see, Colleen, you asked about, I think those are the only other issues I wanted to mention other than unemployment insurance. And this is where I am definitely going to lean on Bruce, other than saying, right, there was a bill that was passed already this session, Senate Bill 5061, and it provided some benefit and relief to claimants and employers. There is another bill, 5478, that is still moving forward, and it appropriates, in rough terms, appropriates $500 million that's used to reimburse the unemployment insurance account instead of charging employers the benefit ratings. So Bruce, with that context, take it away. You're the UI expert.
Yeah, the bill that passed earlier this session, 5061 that Josh mentioned, it basically lowered the rate of increase on employers and their unemployment insurance taxes, but it really didn't look forward into the following years. And for those of you who are employers, you know that your unemployment insurance taxes are based on your 4 years of experience of your employees using the system. So any of the layoffs related to COVID are carrying with you over the next 4 years in the tax structure. So the Senate and the House have both, proposed spending $500 to $600 million to help, relieve some of the increase associated with that change in experience ratings. The Senate version targets 13 NAICS codes that were the most severely impacted. That includes your smaller retailers, your fitness and gyms, your hospitality sector, and a few others. It includes an entity like the Blackball Ferry Line. The House has a version that's kind of squirrely in that it looks at the number of employees as opposed to the sectors that were most impacted. But that's all going to get reconciled here in the last couple of weeks. And I expect that we'll see something emerging that'll at least be another step in the direction of providing some relief from unemployment insurance tax hikes in the next couple of years. Won't be a complete, exemption, if you will, but it'll be helpful.
Thanks, Bruce. So those are the NOLA priorities. That's what we're working on. Pretty good lay of the land there, I think, and what we're dealing with in the last 11 days. Any last questions, Colleen, or anybody else?
Does anybody have any questions for Josh or Bruce? I know locally, I don't know if Connie, if you want to chime in on broadband, our county is trying, there's going to be a lot of funding available around federal funding for broadband. And the intention is to match those, we have to be organized, and our county is working on how do we do that to make sure we're prepped to go for grants and the rest. And I know Marco Zayas is representing the county in that effort, and they're working with the PUD, and then the port and Commissioner Beauvais, who's on, maybe she wants to speak to it briefly, is working on it from the port's perspective. And there was a big study that was completed. And one of the recommendations out of that study is that in order to take advantage of the funds at the federal level, we need to be organized and work cooperatively to access some of those funds. Is there, oh good, there she is. Do you want to speak to that, Commissioner Beauvais?
Well, you filled that in pretty good. As you said, the study completed, and now the group is looking at it. And one of the main recommendations that came out is that a broadband authority be established with the three main government agencies, which would be the county, PUD, and the port. We are still working through those issues. PUD, of course, they've not been able to do all of this by themselves, and so they're wondering what their place is in all of this. One of the things that we do need to look at least for PUD, is O&M costs afterward. But I think that as different communication outlets hook up to it, that those kinds of things can be dealt with. So we're still really in the early kind of foot tripping type stage and trying to set up this authority, but we are meeting with the county on the 26th to try to start bringing that together.
Great, thank you. And Donna had a question, and then we'll, I think, wrap it up.
Thanks, Colleen. My question is, we were forced to close our business for 11 weeks because of COVID, as many businesses were. And on the unemployment benefits, we were told at the time that we would be exempt from being charged for our unemployment benefits. And of course, that was not true. And in the as the legislature is working through this, is there any chance that we will be exempt from that? Or are they still going to basically lie to us and we will be responsible for some sort of unemployment benefit charges?
I don't know. I'm sorry. And Bruce is really the UI guy, has had to leave. I think you will, my sense is you'll see some relief from increases, but I doubt that you'll be exempt. But that's, again, pretty basic level of unemployment insurance and what's going on there.
Yeah, we went from a 0 rating to all of a sudden all of us were laid off, of course. So it's pretty disappointing.
Right.
So Donna, I will send an email to you and Bruce and ask that particular question. So, because he's really the expert on this. Has represented the Retail Association, Hospitality Association over the years and helped write the legislation years ago. So people really turn to him to understand all the nuances and details. So we will take care of that.
Thank you.
Everyone, thank you so much. It's 9:02. Really appreciate you joining us, and Josh, all your work on behalf of businesses and communities on the North Olympic Peninsula. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll see how this all rolls out.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice to see everybody. Thanks, Colleen. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.